Follow up on my question, my first question from yesterday, which was I had mentioned about if just having awareness was enough, and in your response it was yes, but you didn't. There's a pathway to it. So my question is there a formula to the pathway? And as maybe it's a follow-up question. The second question is, one of my personal experiences where I feel like I have experienced consciousness, or consciousness has experienced it and itself within me, is through the use of psychedelics, where I've felt like I was everything but nothing. I felt I was loved, that I was loved, that I was connected with the universe. And I know that currently there's a lot of research with psychedelics as far as for treating trauma and so forth. So one is the question is, what is your opinion of psychedelics? And then also, I guess there's a third question with regards to trauma. Is trauma something that happens to you, or does it just the body mind, or is it?
You have already exceeded my memory
your limits.
allowance.
Okay.
So what was the first one again?
All right. So the first question was with regards to what.
Yeah, consciousness.
Consciousness. What are the steps that, like, for someone like myself to?
Yeah, the steps. The general steps is to find out what I truly am. What is my true identity? When I say I, what does this pronoun I refer to experientially? You see? Usually, it has more than one referent. For instance, if I have a car accident in which I was not present, my car was on the parking lot at Macy's, and some lady we are at full capacity here, so we need to. Some lady inadvertently bumped into it. And then I say, I had an accident. In this case, I refers to what? To my car, right? But usually I don't think I am my car, right? So it's an allowed use or misuse of the pronoun I, because I'm very aware that I am not my car. Nevertheless, I say I had an accident. Second case, I have the flu. Well, if I means my body, yes, I have the flu. The body has the flu, right? But third case, I hear, I understand, I love. That refers to our true I, right? And it is not obvious that it refers to the body. Unless you are French and love making, is something. Yeah, but yeah, because we watch a movie called a series very beautiful called Versailles, but there is more than French kissing in it. It's very French. Anyway, it's kind of abusive, but it's beautiful images, very beautiful. Anyway, that was we close. I'm like a lawyer, I'm paid by the minute. He knows. It takes an expert to recognize it.
You're behind me, I'm paid by the second.
Oh, yes. So, ultimately, we have to acknowledge that our real I is that which loves, that which perceives, that which feels, that which thinks, that which understands, right? In other words, if we were given the choice, you can lose your body, but you still be able to perceive, to understand, to love. Or you won't be able to perceive anything, to understand anything, to love, to enjoy anything, but you will still have a body. What choose you?
I choose the first thing.
Right. Which shows that our true identity is rather that which understands, loves, perceives, etc., rather than the body. So the real proper use of the pronoun I refers to awareness, that which is hearing my words in this very moment, that which understands them as I speak. Right? That's our true identity. Now, the question, so the path is the first step on the path is the one I have just presented, to recognize that I am rather awareness than the body. Right? Now, people will object, yes, but in my opinion, they are one and the same. I have a consciousness because I have a body. Without a body, there wouldn't be consciousness, you know? So therefore, no distinction should be made. I am the body has consciousness, therefore I am also consciousness. Well, that is the point to investigate. That's the second step. The second step is to try to find out, okay, you are telling me that society, my parents, almost everybody believes that to be the case. That awareness is an emergent property from the body. What is the evidence? What is the evidence? You know? Then you may come up with your own elements of proof. But then the purpose of this type of meetings is to evaluate the validity of the elements of proof, the evidence we can come up with in support of this belief that consciousness is dependent upon the body, is created by it, you see. And at the end of this investigation, we will acquire a total certainty, not an approximate certainty, but a total certainty that there is absolutely zero evidence that shows that consciousness is dependent upon the body. You know, that's the second step. First step, I am consciousness rather than the body. Should they be different? Should they be different? Second step, there is no evidence that they are one and the same, that consciousness is dependent upon the body. Now the third element, part of the investigation is okay, since there is no evidence that consciousness is dependent upon the body, that opens a new possibility. Because this independence of consciousness from the body leaves open the possibility that consciousness is much bigger than the body. You see that the policy, one body, one consciousness for each body, may be wrong. It may be there is one consciousness for all bodies, you know? In other words, that just as consciousness expands over time, spans over time, if you will, it is the same consciousness that was a witness of your events yesterday, which is a witness of the current events. It is also possible that consciousness also spans across minds. You see, that's a possibility. Since there is no evidence that it doesn't. You see? So then, and that's the final step, to investigate the possibility for consciousness to be universal, to be unlimited. This investigation has to be experiential or experimental, if you will. On the level of the mind, there will be a transformation through which we will accumulate, if you will, through multiple experiments, a preponderance of evidence in favor of the universal consciousness hypothesis, if you will, instead of the limited consciousness. So the three steps. One, I am consciousness rather than the mind. Two, there is no way that I could ever, or that anybody could ever, prove that consciousness is dependent upon the body. Three, conducting experiments to try to find out if that's the case and if consciousness is universal or not. Now, going to something you mentioned, you see, so I leave this first question that delineates the path. You talk about the experience of consciousness, and you mentioned I had the experience of consciousness through the use of psychedelic substances. The experience of consciousness is something much simpler than what you call the experience of consciousness. Because if I ask you the question, in this moment, are you conscious? Yes. Are you aware? Yes. And then if I ask you, did you answer from experience or from hearsay or from belief?
I answer because I'm aware.
Yes, you answer from experience, in other words, not because dad has told you or mom has told you when you were a kid, you know, there is consciousness. Or because you have learned that in school, right? We all know consciousness directly, and therefore we know it from experience. So the experience of consciousness, the real experience of consciousness, is not necessarily what we experience during a psychedelic experience, which is an altered content of consciousness, an altered state. This state has a beginning and has an end. This state has its own qualities. You may drive on your car for 5 minutes on your watch, but for you, it's like 6 hours. And I don't know, and also you may be under the impression that with your wheel, you are not turning your car, but you are turning the road. And it's very difficult because the road turns in opposite direction from your wheel. So then you may panic, you know, and then you may have to stop the car and hear your heart beating, and it goes boom, boom, boom in the car. I'm making a story here.
Yeah,
but,
I know. That is a crazy story.
It's not too far-fetched, right? But all of that is about content. It's a different state. It's just as when we go asleep, right? We experience an altered state. It's different. But that's the content of consciousness. Actually, differences are always about content. Consciousness itself is always the same. It's like the mirror. The mirror is always the same. The objects reflected in the mirror changes depending what is in front of the mirror. The mirror has no color, no shape of its own. That's why it's in a sense invisible. In fact, a good mirror, when we look into it, we don't think about the mirror. The mirror, it is the invisibility of the mirror that makes it a perfect mirror, right? If it is visible because it has scratches or stains, it's not a good mirror. So a good mirror is perfectly invisible. Consciousness is perfect. It's a perfectly invisible mirror of its content. You know? So to pinpoint the difference between the experience of consciousness. Now, I said the experience of consciousness is invisible. It doesn't mean it doesn't have qualities. Because let's talk about, for instance, let's talk about one quality of the experience of consciousness, which is truth, or, if you will, self-evidence. Something which is self-evident is something that the existence of which doesn't require an external object to be proven, right? For instance, your honor is not self-evident that my client didn't kill the guy, right? Because the gun was not his property. But so we need external, usually to establish a fact, to establish a truth, we need external elements. So these truths are not self-evident, but consciousness has a quality of truth and of self-evidence in that sense that we don't need anything to establish that there is consciousness. It establishes itself. It is its own proof. So, in other words, what I have just described is that the experience of consciousness has a perfume of truth, or of certainty, if you will. It has also a perfume of being, of existence. You see, it's a fact, it exists, it is. You cannot deny the existence of consciousness, it exists. So there are other qualities that may be discovered. But these qualities are not qualities that can be attributed to objects, to thoughts, to perceptions. Okay, that's about the experience of consciousness. The last question about psychedelic experiences is that any experience in our life, when we are ready for it, can be a trigger that begins, that initiates, if you will, the process of recovering the lost kingdom of our true nature. It could be an accident. It could be being hit by a 2x4. You know? It could be a bankruptcy. It could be a happy event. It could be a big joint. You see? But I had this friend, he had 100 LSD trips. It's a lot. But he was German and so very systematic. Because on the first trip he had this extraordinary revelation of consciousness. And then the 99 subsequent trips, it didn't reproduce itself. After 100, it stopped. So anything can be a trigger but it doesn't mean that it is a usable tool. For instance, is that which triggered your, if grace in your life showed up as, let's say, a bankruptcy plus a divorce, usually it's first the divorce and the bankruptcy. But a bankruptcy plus a divorce, and then if you want to help someone on the path, you are not telling him, okay, first get a divorce, and then whatever money you have left, just give it away. It's not a good tool to enlightenment. You see what I mean? In other words, the instruments of grace are not very predictable. A last footnote on my answer for the rookies, because everybody else has heard me say that again and again and again, is my definition of consciousness or awareness. For me, that's the same. It is a reality which is hearing my words right now. Because hearing is real, something is real. We cannot deny that awareing is real, right? It's real. We are not making it up. So the reality that is part of this experience of awareing is what I call consciousness, the reality, that which cannot be denied.
Thank you.